He was a high-risk prisoner. He wasn't ordinary. He was connected to powerful people, presidents, billionaires, royalty, yet he died inside a federal jail cell under circumstances that still don't make sense. He was supposed to be watched. He wasn't. And what he knew never made it to the courtroom floor. His name was Jeffrey Epstein, and his story didn't end with a simple arrest. It dissolved into a mystery that still haunts justice systems, journalists, and anyone who dares to ask what really happened.
Material, it should have ceased. If I were the FBI director then, it wouldn't have happened. The search warrants were limited to small...
The path that led to the end starts far back, before the headlines in 2019, back in 2008 in Florida, where the first cracks in the fade began to show. Epstein was a wealthy financier whose lifestyle included private jets, lavish homes, yachts, and a social circle that blended wealth, influence, and secrecy. But beneath that glittering surface were darker allegations. Dozens of underage girls came forward, saying that Epstein had sexually abused them, that he paid them for sex, and that he used his influence and wealth to create a network of exploitation. Federal prosecutors had gathered testimony, witness statements, and evidence. The case they were building in federal court was serious, enough to put a man in prison for years. But then, in a move that stunned legal observers, Epstein was offered a plea agreement. Instead of facing a federal trial, Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state charges, soliciting prostitution and procuring minors for prostitution. His punishment amounted to 13 months in a county jail, with most of that time spent outside the facility through work release. During these work hours, Epstein was allowed to leave the jail 6 days a week, up to 12 hours a day, to meet with lawyers, advisors, and business associates, essentially free to operate. The deal also included broad immunity for potential co-conspirators, unnamed individuals who might have been part of the alleged abuse network. Epstein's legal team insisted this was standard, but victims and their advocates called it a betrayal. The federal investigation that might have uncovered names, patterns, and broader complicity was effectively shut down. Epstein walked away with something rare, not just a light sentence, but what many called a non-prosecution shield for anyone else who might have been involved. For years, Epstein faded from public scrutiny. He went back to his life of expensive real estate, private jets, and trips to wealthy enclaves around the world. But something more unsettling was always present. Despite the allegations, he remained surrounded by names that mattered, people who could open doors, make deals, and protect reputations. Then, in 2018 and 2019, the case roared back into public view. Investigative reporting exposed the details of the 2008 plea deal, how it was negotiated in secret, how Epstein's victims were kept in the dark, and how federal prosecutors later said they were blindsided by it. The outrage was intense, and the Justice Department began reviewing what had happened. In New York, federal prosecutors filed new charges against Epstein, this time for sex trafficking involving minors. The indictment was chilling in its detail. Decades of alleged abuse, recruitment, payment, and exploitation. It described how Epstein's underage victims were brought to properties in Manhattan, Palm Beach, and overseas. It laid out how he and others allegedly groomed girls for sex. This was not a case that could be settled quietly. This was a case that was finally going to trial. On July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested once again. His private jet landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, and federal agents were waiting. This time, he was taken into custody under tight security. Prosecutors made clear they were prepared to proceed. No deals, no backroom agreements, no leniency. Epstein pleaded not guilty and was denied bail. As investigators built their case, they executed a search of his Manhattan townhouse. What they found astonished even seasoned law enforcement officers. Inside the multi-story Upper East Side building was a massive collection of digital material, hard drives, thumb drives, digital media, and tens of thousands of photographs. Some sources later described the magnitude of the archive as shocking. Images, flight logs, calendars, guest lists, and records that appeared to map a wide network of people and places. There was also a little black book, a personal contact list that included hundreds of names, politicians, royalty, business magnates, media figures, and others who had at one point crossed paths with Epstein. Agents began sifting through phone records, flight manifests from Epstein's private jets, often described as the Lolita expressed by the press, and contact lists from his homes in New York, Palm Beach, and the Caribbean. They were mapping connections that had previously been hidden or obscured. Then something strange happened inside the walls of the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. On July 23, 2019, just a few weeks after his arrest, Epstein was found injured in his cell. Officials said he had marks on his neck and was semi-conscious. Initial reports were vague. Some hinted at a possible suicide attempt. Others mentioned conflicting accounts that another inmate may have been involved. The specifics were unclear, and the reports that emerged were contradictory. In response to this incident, jail officials placed Epstein on suicide watch, the most severe form of inmate monitoring. Under suicide watch, guards must observe an inmate continuously, remove anything that could be used for self-harm, and keep the individual under strict supervision. But only days later, something equally disturbing occurred. Epstein was taken off suicide watch. Mental health staff cleared him, saying he was no longer deemed a high risk for self-harm. He was transferred to the Special Housing Unit, a high-security section of the jail where inmates are isolated but not under constant surveillance. The decision to remove him from suicide watch raised questions among mental health experts and legal observers. Questions about judgment, safety, and the risk of placing a vulnerable man back into a largely unsupervised environment. The stage was now set for a night that would change everything. On the night of August 9, 2019, Epstein was alone in his cell. According to jail rules, guards were required to check on him every 30 minutes. Hours passed without any check. The two correctional officers on duty, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, later admitted they had not performed the required rounds. Instead, both fell asleep and failed to monitor his cell. When they filled out their logs, they falsified entries to make it appear that they had complied with their duties. At the same time, most of the surveillance cameras near Epstein's cell, cameras that might have shown what happened, were not functioning. Weeks earlier, the jail's recording system had experienced a significant malfunction. The result was a bizarre convergence. Cameras that should have captured hours of footage went dark at the very moment the most critical events were unfolding. In the early morning hours of August 10, guards discovered Epstein unresponsive in his cell. He was hanging from a bedsheet-like ligature. Emergency responders were called, and efforts were made to revive him, but they failed. Epstein was pronounced dead in the hospital, and the official ruling by the New York City Medical Examiner was suicide by hanging. Across the nation, the announcement sent shockwaves. A man facing decades in prison, days away from trial, found dead in a federal facility under supervision that he was supposed to receive. The circumstances were so unusual that they invited speculation, skepticism, and doubt. To this day, the most frequently asked questions are simple. How could all safeguards fail at once? How could a man who had been found injured only weeks earlier be left alone without proper checks? How could cameras malfunction at the critical moment? Adding fuel to the fire was a startling detail from an independent review. A respected forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, was invited to examine the autopsy findings. Baden noted fractures in Epstein's neck, including the hyoid bone, an injury some experts say is more commonly associated with strangulation than with hanging, especially in older individuals. Baden stopped short of claiming foul play, but his observations deepened the mystery and amplified public skepticism. Meanwhile, the 2 correctional officers who had failed to check on Epstein were charged with falsifying records and neglecting their duties. But even their legal outcome was controversial. In 2021, both entered agreements with federal prosecutors that spared them from prison time. They were sentenced to probation, community service, and continued cooperation with investigations, a resolution that many viewed as lenient given the severity of what had occurred. He was supposed to be watched every 30 minutes. He wasn't. Cameras failed, guards slept, logs were falsified. A man who might have revealed secrets never got the chance to tell his story in open court. What he knew, who he might have named, and what truths might have emerged are locked forever behind that locked cell door. No final testimony, no complete list of names, no clear account of that night, just a broken chain of events, and a silence that replaced answers. If you keep looking into stories like this, pay attention to what's missing. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden, it's simply never allowed to surface.